Modern society is very confused with regards to what gender is. People are taught through the likes of post-structural, postmodern theory and feminism that it is only a social construct. It's a very Rousseauian idea, this infantilization with patriarchal construction, that society negatively imprints upon our souls. It is not based on opposites or any kind of fundamental nature in biology, and this has led to something which you could call gender nihilism, which is like saying that the feminine, masculine and gender doesn't really exist at all. They are just another social construct created under a power structure of patriarchy for totalitarian gender control. We are just a product of culture. But the thing is, they are very contradictory of their own teachings, because in gender studies, they would say that gender is a social construct and refute the importance of hormones and biology, but then agree that if you want to transition, if you want to be a transgender, you need hormones to influence an attempting transitioning in gender. So it's quite funny how contradictory it all really is. If it's a social construct, why do people take hormones to transition exactly? But in today's video, I'll be talking about the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine within history, and how gender presented itself as something which was not founded on any kind of social construction, but on our understanding with nature in relation to consciousness, body and mind, which is the opposite of a social construct, and through that, how it has presented itself in cultures and religions. There'll be some really interesting stuff in this video. Civilization seems to always work in cycles, and when a new civilization props up or reoccurs in history, men and women always seem to go back to a form of polarization and separation. It has only been with our modern civilization today where men and women have really worked together in unison. So to start off, the Venus of Willendorf is a very small statuette from the old Stone Age of how femaleness and woman was represented and perceived during times of continuous famine. And what we can see is that it represents all that was featured within primitive earth cult or paganism. The woman was associated with the Great Mother associated with the earth, the curvature of the mountains, caves and land in which we settle upon. Magic was at the heart of pagan ritual, for it was the summoning of goods from the mother. It was invocation. What we can see is that the Venus of Willendorf represents nothing of masculinity or of maleness, of phallic direction or order. She is faceless and impersonal to represent the immensity of primitive sex in nature, but also to show that she is not the force which moulds a society. With no face is no identity in psychology. She is simply nature's overflowing existence of femaleness. Apollonian aspects of male and man are not found in this archaic Dionysian embodiment. This also was very much of a fertility god. During these times it would be very difficult to have children and populate, simply due to the harsh reality of living in small tribes, which had consistent food shortages. This statuette is the archetype of the biological woman, or the Great Mother, the biological foundation of woman, and the preciousness of such a sacred ability. Paglia writes in Sexual Personae, bulging, bulbous, bubbling Venus of Willendorf, bent over by her own belly, tends the hot pot of nature. She is eternally pregnant. She broods in all senses. She is hen, nest, egg. End quote. Magic was presented to the Great Mother within the darkness of cave wall paintings. The caves were the deep bellies of the Great Mother, so there was no better place to draw and sketch necessary animals needed for harvest and food, for Mother Nature to reproduce what was hers for her people. But is Venus of Willendorf a just presentation of the female experience? Most definitely. You could say that woman is internally chained or bound to the functioning of nature. Paglia writes, Woman is entrapped in a wavy, watery body. She must listen and learn from something beyond and yet within her. The Venus of Willendorf, blind, tongueless, brainless, armless, knock-kneed, seems a depressing model of gender. Yet woman is depressed, pressed down by Earth's gravitation, calling us back to her bosom." End quote. So we can truly understand to a degree the natural struggles of being a woman through the depiction of nature, Earth, and the biological female archetype. When we look at something like art, it is very Apollonian. It is detached from Dionysian nature. It is the drawings of lines, linear and direct points of expression, making the abyss of nature into something defined, the very opposite of the Venus of Willendorf. Remember, she has no eyes. She is the deep nature of the underworld, and beauty has not yet truly begun. Paglia writes, "How did beauty begin? Earth cult, suppressing the eye, locks man in the belly of mothers. There is, I insisted, nothing beautiful in nature. Nature is primal power, coarse and turbulent. Beauty is our weapon against nature. By it we make objects, giving them limits, symmetry, proportion. Beauty halts and freezes the melting flux of nature." End quote. Egypt was really a place of wonder and mystery that saw an infusion of masculine maleness placed into its culture, with the likes of living gods such as the pharaoh to direct and demand, with the seeking eye of a new culture places Apollonian image into the collective armoury. Mother Nature may embody the mountains of land, but the pyramids were man mountains, built from stones to rival against nature herself. The Egyptians couldn't find a better material to use than stone, something of unregenerate nature for the mother to engulf once more. The phallic nature of Egyptian art, in frozen form, shows no sympathy for the warm indulgences of motherly nature. No Venus of Willendorf can be found upon these walls. The Nile was a location of Dionysian feminine interaction, the place of economic endeavour, with the unfoldment and enfoldment of nature's washing river to bring rich mud and water to the crops of Egyptian civilization. Another place where Chthonian nature was placed into Egypt was through the spiritual world of the dead and in the afterlife. Paglia writes, "The Book of the Dead was daemonic thought, ruminations, earth chorings. The mummy, swaddled like an infant, returned to nature's womb for rebirth. The painted tomb was cave art, prayers to demonic darkness. Egyptian culture was both earth-rending and earth-rejecting." End quote. Thus we come to the presentation of what became the opposite of the Venus of Willendorf, Nefertiti. She is the Apollonian image, overcoming the, what you could call, humpy horror show of Mother Earth. The creation of beauty, a symbol of sexual personae. The creation of fashion, a ritualization of what Western personality is and was to become. Mother Nature's femaleness is all and everything in multiplication, yet Nefertiti is a reduction, favouring Apollonian direction found from the male eye. A founding of the feminine within the beauty of art. A sculptured soul chiselled from square and compass. The dynasty that Nefertiti was within at the time held some very powerful women, and over time we can really see how the interaction of the male and the female to create a civilization developed cultural evolution with relation to art, fashion and beauty. She is the complete opposite of the other statue because Egypt had developed far beyond the struggle of food resources, so the biological dependence of woman was not given ritualistic status. The only goddess in Egypt that can be really related to the Venus of Willendorf is the goddess of the Nile, Hapi, who symbolized annual flooding, the only physical Dionysian connection with nature. Thus, through imagery, her breasts were much larger than other depictions of women in Egyptian art, similar to the Great Mother statue. Again, Paglia writes, "The pregnancy of Venus of Willendorf is Chthonian belly magic, Nefertiti Apollonian head magic. Thinking makes it so. Nefertiti is a royal highness, propelling herself like a jet into sky cult. Forward thrust. Nefertiti leads with her chin. She has great bones. She is Egyptian stone architecture, just as Venus of Willendorf is earthen ovals, woman as quivering poached egg, femaleness sublimized by becoming harder and more concrete. End quote. Now, with just these two examples of the female archetype, we can see how nature, biology, and our close association with it paved the understanding of gender and sex, and how over time, culture upon culture, the interaction between man and woman, or man and nature, masculine and feminine, forwarded the evolution of culture, both complementing each other through intuitive opposition, evolution of mind and expression. Not as a priori assumption or idea of gender being a socially constructed existence, that they are made up and not true. Such a statement does away with any understanding of culture, history, biology, and human behaviour. And we take further examples from the use of female goddesses or female representations all around the world, such as Kali in Hinduism, gorgons like Medusa in Greek mythology, Maenads who were the nymphs of Dionysus, so on and so on. They all represent a strong connection with the earth and daemonic nature. Now, when we look at the situation of transsexualism, we come across something very interesting that is not the same as today's phenomena, but similar. The most interesting thing I've come to find is that of Siberian shamanism. Now, Siberian shamans, or shamans in general, were spiritual people who tried to integrate opposing spirits. They would be healers who would enter trance during ritual and practice divination. Siberian shamans specifically wore women's kaftans sewn with large round discs as female breasts. Mircea Eliade, if I've said that name right, a famous historian, referred to this as an example of ritual androgyny, or the spiritual reconciliation of opposites. And it's pretty interesting when we have people today undergoing surgery, where one would deem a kind of repulsion towards one's own body and gender and see themselves with a sort of inferiority with dysmorphia, because from what I know, these Siberian shamans would never intervene in such action. And it makes me wonder that people who refer to themselves as such should look into it, because it might just be the extremely relevant spiritual necessity that they might be looking for, which is never looked upon in society, especially Western society in general, instead of surgery. And it makes sense in a lot of ways, because today's society is completely void of spiritual activity of any sort. And I am sure they are never referred to such literature, because the entire thing is a completely materialistic money-making avenue which is there to be capitalized on. But now I want to talk about the masculine and the feminine. I take the Jungian view on this, which is that of the anima and the animus, which is that the anima or animus is within our collective unconscious, depending on your gender. That our relation to the masculine, if you are a woman, or your relation to the feminine, if you're a man, exists, and that correct integration of this allows for a well-integrated individual. And this is not saying that gender is this nihilistic fluidity of non-existence or truth, quite the opposite, as I have demonstrated already. The opposites, the contraries, are necessary and drive existence. If you didn't have them, you would not have progression. If you didn't have paganism, you wouldn't have gotten Christianity, for example. Everything is a battle between Dionysus and Apollo, essentially. So let's look at Hinduism. You have two forces referred to as Shakti and Shiva. Shakti is feminine, which means energy, and Shiva is masculine, which means consciousness. And these two aspects are depicted together. Both may be extremely distinct from each other, but both require that integration for being a well-rounded individual. And this is the same for something like the yin and yang, two extreme opposites, yet they are to be well integrated for wholeness. Now, with this said, you may say, well, doesn't society require us to act within particular gender roles that are socially constructed? No, Gender roles are pragmatic relations to the masculine and feminine, which are true. We know gender exists. I cover the cultural, historical, archetypal stuff. The biology is also obviously there as well. For example, men have 8 times or 9 times more testosterone than women. Gender and gender roles are not exactly the same thing though. The main reason we have problems with gender roles now is because of the development and changing culture. Should women go to the workplace and wear makeup? Is that right when understanding the psychology behind makeup and why women wear it? Is it ethical in the grand scheme of things? Should men and women work together? Why do many working class men feel so dissatisfied and demasculinized within the workplace? Is it because big neoliberal corporations turn the once local male-dominated workplace into numb, technocratic, demoralizing machines, but also gender-safe spaces which hold nothing of expression, love, care, passion or happiness for work itself? With more women going to the workplace, are they going to be less satisfied later on in life if they choose to not have children? All of these questions. The more you play with culture, the more you play with the roles of men and women. And there are definite chances that there are going to be, for example, negative imbalances in relation to the likes of the Shiva and Shakti energies, or of the anima and the animus, because Carl Jung specifically talked about this, and he referred to it as psychological possession, depending on the gender of the individual. And he referred to this as both anima or animus possession. Animus possession would be the masculine side of a woman negatively dominating her personality with the likes of aggression, spite, and malevolence. With the animus having unconscious roots, it should have some form of relation with her father, and the relationship which was held between the two. This experience with her father being the first masculine association imprints the beginning of her attitude towards her animus, and the same is vice versa for men. But of course there are other influential reasons. If we look at the yin and yang, we come to see the opposite residing within the other opposite, and this is what Jung referred to as the masculine within woman or the feminine within man. Jung writes, I quote, "A woman possessed by the animus is always in danger of losing her femininity, adapted feminine persona, just as a man in like circumstances runs the risk of effeminacy. The psychic changes of sex are due entirely to the fact that a function which belongs inside has been turned outside. The reason for this perversion is clearly the failure to give adequate recognition to an inner world which stands autonomously opposite to the outer world and makes just as serious demands on our capacity for adaptation. When under such possessions, Jung corresponds the animus with the paternal logos, and the anima with the maternal eros. The Karen archetype, for example, symbolizes a strange, collective neurotic, contrasexual complex regarding the likes of animus possession. This is usually followed by negative overbearing expressions of masculine logos, such as the principle of logic and structure. Logos has been traditionally associated with the word of God, and thus it is no surprise that Karen-like behaviour involves ungrounded and verbal or even physical confrontation. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. This is a pretty long one. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, comment and subscribe. Make sure to check out my Patreon if you are interested in donating towards the channel. I also have set up a YouTube membership for people that want to contribute but don't want to use Patreon as a means of doing so. So if you want to go to my Patreon channel homepage, there is a button which says join. You can click on it and choose whatever tier you wish. With that said, thanks for watching and I wish you a lovely day.